Hey guys, what's up? Happy 50th anniversary of Trek. This is Tyler from Animator Kid. Before we get into this video, I want to address a mistake that I made in the last video. As many of you were eager to point out, the idea of a Marxist society is not necessarily contradictory to the existence of a federal republic like the Federation. In fact, Chris McGrain suggested that the Federation is in the final stages of Leninist socialism, before the government stage finally withers away, although the Federation's imperialistic neighbors still necessitate a strong military force. All I can say to that is, you're probably right. But today I want to talk to you about Star Trek's alternate history. No, not the mirror universe, not the Abrams verse, not the timeline where the Nakul actually killed Lenin himself. No, I'm talking about the prime Star Trek reality, everything that we see on screen. This is of course assuming that the 5 main series, soon to be 6, from Enterprise to Voyager and everything in between, take place in one continuous stream. If you got problems with that, make your own video. Okay, let's see where to start. Well, for one thing, the divergence point between our universe and the Star Trek universe likely exists as far back as the Big Bang, where members of the Q Continuum are said to have been hanging around the young universe. After that, the Guardian of Forever was constructed, the ancient humanoids spread their genetic code around the galaxy, and so on and so forth. But that's galactic history. I want to focus specifically on Earth history, leading up to first contact with the Vulcans. I'm also excluding a lot of the so-called secret history, including the Roswell incident, Carbon Creek, and the eugenics wars. All of these can be retroactively incorporated alongside real history by just saying, the public didn't know. Obviously, one of the earliest observable differences between the Star Trek universe and our own universe is the fact that there was no Star Trek. The franchise itself didn't exist. This begs the question, what would a world without Star Trek have looked like? The fact is, people have written entire articles about this subject, and aside from the differences to science fiction and other forms of entertainment, we do know that technology that we use today could look a lot different, or at least a little different. Of course, this presents a challenge, because the few episodes that do take place partially in the 20th and 21st centuries mostly feature some of the same stuff. I mean, cell phones and computers certainly show up in various installments, including the Voyage Home in past tense. Heck, the Voyage Home even features Apple product placement. But not so fast. There are a few distinct deviations from our own history that are of worthy note here. One of the most well-known is the launch of Voyager 6. The last of the Voyager probes in 1999. This took place 13 years after the invention of transparent aluminum, along with some help from Montgomery Scott, and resulted in NASA losing contact with the probe after it fell into a black hole. Nearly 300 years later follow the events of Star Trek the Motion Picture, but let's not get into that. I want to explore Voyager 6's origin story. In our timeline, there were of course only 2 Voyager probes, both launched in the 1970s. As they were originally supposed to be part of the Mariner program, which launched nearly a dozen probes during its lifetime, it's not too inconceivable that the Voyager series could have continued and more probes could have made their way out to the stars. Another early difference in my memory alpha, the canon Star Trek Encyclopedia, is that in 1996, NASA discovered evidence of past microbial life on Mars. This comes from the 2-part Voyager episode, Futures End. Of course, we haven't actually discovered evidence of past life on Mars. At least not yet. Futures End is said to take place in an alternate timeline, so the exact date when microbial life was discovered on Mars in the Star Trek timeline is still up in the air. What's not up in the air, though, is the launch of the Nomad probe in 2002. Designed by Jackson Roykirk, Nomad's mission was to seek out life in interstellar space. However, during its mission, it was damaged by a meteoroid, and contact was lost. Sound familiar? Nomad can likely be incorporated alongside the other probes that NASA launched during the late 1990s and early 2000s, such as Charybdis, Huygens, Dawn, etc. What's also interesting is the existence of the Ares 5 rocket in the Star Trek continuity, a part of the Constellation program that was ultimately cancelled in 2010 in our timeline. Thanks, Obama! Ares 5 was to be an unmanned cargo launch vehicle to complement the Ares 1, which was intended to carry the Orion spacecraft, still currently under development. In real life, both rocket concepts were scrapped in favor of the Space Launch System, a more cost-effective method of transporting both astronauts and payloads in one fell swoop. In the Star Trek timeline, apparently the Constellation program was never cancelled, and the 2 rockets went on to be used in missions to the Moon and Mars as early as the 2020s. So far, we've covered 3 main divergences from actual history within the Star Trek timeline, aside from the absence of the franchise itself. The Voyager 6 probe, Nomad, and the Ares 5. There's just one more difference that we need to catalog before we can move on, and that is Millennium Gate. Millennium Gate, completed in the year 2012, was Earth's first self-sustaining civic environment. A kilometer-high megastructure with its own biosphere that served as a model for the first Mars colonies. Construction of Millennium Gate began in January 2001, and was paid for by tax dollars of the residents of Portage Creek, Indiana. Obviously, the structure was never built in our timeline, although a few scientific experiments have come pretty close, including Biosphere 2 in Oracle, Arizona. So essentially, the idea of a Millennium Gate existing in the early 21st century is not that far-fetched, especially since Biosphere 2, even though it's much smaller, has been operating since 1991. As far as other technological differences, it's really hard to predict what exactly would have been different if the Star Trek franchise had never existed, even though we know that Star Trek inspired and predicted a lot of modern technologies. In particular, the flip phone is said to have been directly inspired by Star Trek's communicator. Of course, we still see cell phones in several Trek depictions of contemporary life, so it's not hard to imagine that the design inspiration could have come from somewhere else. Where exactly that is, I don't know. And of course, it's likely that things like tablet computers and voice recognition software and jet injectors would have developed anyway, because their precursors were already around before Trek was conceived. Some other technologies that may have not come to fruition as early as the 21st century, though, are the tricorder, some subfields of nanotechnology, and the modern obsession with matter teleportation, all of which were directly inspired by Trek. Even Google Earth is said to have been partially inspired by the franchise. There you have it. As far as your smartphones are concerned, in Star Trek's version of the year 2016, we may be a few years behind. Although again, it's really hard to predict exactly what would have been different. Side note, the Wired article that I mentioned earlier suggests that modern science fiction, in the absence of Trek, would have been more heavily based on Planet of the Apes and the Twilight Zone. And a second side note, androids. Man, they really missed the mark on that one. Although certain next-generation novels have suggested that, yes, androids and other robots still would have existed in the 21st century, but they would have been destroyed and banned after World War III, something like that. Some retroactive continuity explanation. Of course, there's a plethora of other events that are predicted to occur within the next few decades, many of which will hopefully be avoided, although some of them maybe not. In fact, I need to dedicate an entire video to the subject of Trek's alternate future, at least from the perspective of where we are today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you think that I glossed over everything, be sure to let me know in the comments. If you want to check out my other Trek videos, click the I right there in that corner of the screen. I got it right this time. Be sure to like and share this video. Don't forget to be awesome, and don't forget to subscribe. Live long and prosper.